everybody, and welcome back again to another episode of mine. And today we're going to be discussing anime. I know this, for a lot of people, this is a great topic. For others, not so much. So I hope to give you something to actually help you into it. Because I'll admit, when I was a kid, there was some stuff that was considered anime I didn't know counted as anime, and then later when I realized it, I kept watching and came to like it more and more. And okay, first let's discuss the popularity of anime. One of the biggest reasons that I truly believe that anime is actually doing well, especially here in America now and over the years, is because of the characters. As compared to American versions of cartoons that came out when I was a kid, the anime of that time, the characters look more realistic. Like you take, let's take Speed Racer of the 60s, 70s when that was out versus what America had. We had Scooby Doo. Sorry, you compare the two, Speed Racer looks more realistic. You could go into the 80s, the Ninja Turtles and Real Ghostbusters and Inspector Gadget. The lines were there, and it was easy to tell that, yeah, these characters were cartoons. But yet you had things like Transformers, where the robots actually looked more realistic. And actually, I think Power Rangers might have gotten some of its ideas from Transformers and Voltron to some extent because of the way they looked. I mean, I may be wrong on that, given how many seasons they had before America got got what was America's first season of Power Rangers. But if you look at them, I think there's an incredible similarity between the two. I mean, between Transformers, what America knows as Voltron, and the Power Rangers series. Another thing that helped make the characters so special in anime is that they were given backstories that made them more relatable. Rather than, oh, they're just science. Like with the Ghostbusters, which was based off the movie, you had characters that what they were given was, oh, they're scientists and they go to catch ghosts. Or in Ace Ventura and the Mask cartoons came from the movies again. And in these ideas are that they took on their characters' histories, which we never actually knew the Jim Carrey's histories of Ace Ventura, of Ace Ventura anyways. When it gets to that point in the movie to explain it, he actually just instead makes a joke out of it. And it's funny in that scene, but it does kind of deny us the actual knowing behind it. But in the Mask case, we knew why he had the mask. But again, not really much of a backstory to it. But with the characters in anime, your characters could have grown up in an abusive home and become respectable adults, could have had these great lives and tried running away from it because they were bored, or could have had something happen to them that changed them in some way, or just been good or bad people in general. But there was a way to their stories that made them more relatable to real life people and the viewers. And the characters in anime, they could range from children to adults. While American style cartoons did the same, again, the anime were more like comics and that, more like American style comics, and this could be because a lot of the anime characters and a lot of the animes actually come from mangas, which to me, were a lot like comic books, just more compressed in a way. But again, these characters and these things could be kids, adults, and like with Voltron, you had kids that were superheroes as well as adults, and it ranged. Majority of your American style cartoons had the heroes at an adult age. Ninja Turtles was the exception in that, but then again, they were aged to being teenagers. They didn't actually grow from it. And eventually they became adults at the end of the series. Well, adult turtles, anyways. Or were considered to be an adult. Splinter, Shredder, they never, and a lot of American ones never aged. In the anime, they could age and grow up at some point. Even if it was a series finale, they could age and grow, much like a regular TV drama could. Okay, the second reason that I think anime does well in America, even when we were heavily having issues with it in the 90s, and I mean from the 70s through the 90s, but another reason I think that they were so good was because of the episodes themselves. Good animes, as I refer to them, often kept going from the previous episode, like with Dragon Ball franchise. The previous episode led into the next one. But there were some that could do the idea of independent episodes, and it worked. But it's somehow the overall story is still tied together. Now, one exception to this is an anime that I saw a while back and liked called the Student Council's Discretion, which was based off of a manga that was a bunch of different ones, which had a bunch of different volumes. They even make jokes about this in the anime about how it changes and about it, going from the manga to the animated version. But while these were independent, overall they did have a story arc to them, even though it didn't seem like it. And a lot of these independent episodes were good because they were contained in the way they were done and they made sense. The Teenage Mutant Ninja, now stuff like American had with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Wild West Cowboys of Moo Mesa and the Mighty Ducks, the episodes were independent for the most part and had nothing to do with each other. The odd exceptions to this in American styling were with Batman the animated series, Superman the animated series, X-Men animated series, and Spider-Man animated series in the 90s. All of which I also watched and thought were good. Like I said, these were exceptions to the rule that American cartoons didn't have story arcs to them. But that's another reason why the anime were so good. It's because they had story arcs. And for them, one story arc could be an entire season, or it could be a few episodes that made it up. But it took more than one episode to explain it. And another thing about these episodes is that anybody could often find characters if they actually showed the full version of the series. People could often find characters to relate to, regardless of the gender or their age in it. And like most adult daytime dramas, also known as soap operas, they threw these storylines and they drug them out to where they made sense and gave them a conclusion at some point that, whether the fans liked it or not, had a point to it and got to that point. They didn't just do the independent episodes where it ended with this and that was it. And as I've mentioned before, a lot of your animes come from mangas, whereas stuff like Batman, Superman, X-Men, and the Ninja Turtles actually came from comic books in America's versions, which could explain why those were actually really good. Okay, now let's get on to the issues that animes had with America, or America's had with anime. First, the censorship. In America, from the 70s through at least the early 90s, probably even still going on today, the dubbing. I know a lot of the older cartoons like Speed Racer, even Transformers, and Voltron all had issues with the dubbing. They either completely changed what the character said in it, or when they tried to do the voiceovers for it, it was like watching the old Godzilla films from that time, where the dubbing was so far off that the character could have stopped talking completely, and the speech they gave would be going on for almost a full 2 minutes afterwards. It felt like. So you'd be sitting there, and you would want to think it was an internal monologue being done instead, which would take you out of the episode. Another thing that came up was was the dubbing or change. Was that happened in dubbing, and this also falls under my next section, which was the changing of characters or stories or scenes, was controversial topics or language used. So, and even the names got changed. Like in Dragon Ball, the character in America known as Hercule was in Japan known as Mr. Satan, but America thought that was wrong and had it changed. And the idea of demons often got changed to monster or energy rather than keeping what they actually were. And another example of the language being changed is in Naruto. If you watched the American version when it aired, if you watched the dubbed version when it aired, though it didn't do like the Godzilla stories and have the speech timing off on it, it did have it where it changed the language to be more child-friendly for what America had for the rating system. The original Naruto series was mostly aimed at being a PG rather than PG-13, so Naruto's key phrase, which from the animes I got of it on disc, stated that it changed from using the word damn to believe it as his phrase. And because of this, it changes. There were other changes made the same way to character scenes or certain topics that were discussed, and it changed things about it and messed up the story in that way. Another good example of this is in Sailor Moon from the 90s. When it got into the season where it brought in Sailor Uranus and Neptune, these characters were known as cousins in it because America had an issue with the whole same-sex couples. And another example of same-sex couples was with Toya and Yuki, aka the Snow Rabbit, in the Cardcaptor Sakura Cardcaptors series, depending on which version you get. If you want with America, if they were nice enough to actually keep the names, it was Toya and Yuki. If not, then it changed to Julian and Tori. which I found interesting that they used the name Tori for a boy because it's not one you heard very often. And but again, back to their relationship that it didn't show. In the Japanese, it's hinted at that these two liked each other and cared for each other in more than a friendship way, even though it was never actually explored. But in the English, it flat out erased all that. The same as it erased, if you watch the American version, the emotional state that when Lee first met the character of Yuki, it changed how he felt towards him and saw him more as a high figure rather than as an older figure to look up to, role model wise, rather than the actual crush that he did have for him. Also, in this series, there was the infatuation that Tomoyo Daidoji, in America known as Madison Lee, had for Sakura. And initially, when I saw this, even in the American version, I thought Madison as a friend might have been going over the limit just a little bit and seemed a little stalker type or obsessed. But when I watched it in the Japanese and found out the truth in one of the episodes, that it reveals that Madison, or Tomoyo, and the actual main character of the series, Sakura, are actually cousins. This actually made a little more sense, but they didn't know it for a long time because Sakura's family had issues within itself, where Sakura's mother and Tomoyo's mother hadn't spoken, and Sakura's mother is dead by the end of by the beginning of the series, and hadn't spoken in years. So Sakura and Tomoyo didn't know each other until they started school. But again, also this friendship that I originally thought as being obsessive or stalkerish, when it brought up that they were cousins, and the fact that Tomoyo's hair length is actually because of her mother remembering Sakura's mother for her hair and how beautiful it was and how long it was, is the reason why Tomoyo grew it out. That to me explained the friendship, because Tomoyo's mother had the same friendship with her cousin, Sakura's mother, for the longest time. And the reason why I think they skipped over Sakura's parents getting married and never went into heavy detail about this is because America has certain things that it has issues with still today that this one had as an actual thing. Sakura's mother was 16 when she got married to Sakura's father. And at the time, Sakura's mother was a model. But something that's mentioned in the Japanese version, that again was skipped over in the American version, is that Sakura's mother was a student, whereas Sakura's father was an actual teacher, was a new teacher at the school. So he didn't have many years on her, but he had enough that, yes, it was a teacher-student relationship involved. And another thing about this, with the changing, if you watch the episodes in the American version, I couldn't find it, so it might have just been in the version I had of it, or in the American language one of it. But it never actually mentions the relationship, the age difference between Sakura's parents, and I couldn't find anywhere where it actually said in the American version that Tomoyo and Sakura were actually related as cousins. It just listed them as being such great friends and even hoping to have the friendship that their mothers had growing up. And one of the final, and now for, let me make sure on this. Yeah. Okay, now for the third issue in America was the dropping of episodes. Sailor Moon, great show. People got to see it to what was known as Super S. The problem is, There's a whole another season after that, known as Sailor Stars. Or Sailor Moon Stars. I'm sorry, I might have that wrong. I'm not sure which way it's actually phrased. But it's known as Stars. And this entire season was dropped in the U.S. because it was deemed too controversial. And again, I think it has something to do with some of the matters that were discussed in it or shown that 90s America couldn't handle, and even today they might still have some issue with, though they would be more open about and accepting of. Such as with the new sailors in this, the ones known as the Starlights, I think that's what they were called. They actually were men in their natural form, but when they changed into their sailor style, they became women in the American version. I mean, they became women. Even having different voice actors for when they did the switch. But again, America, I guess, took this as cross-dressing and everything, and during the 90s was deemed it completely inappropriate and controversial and never aired this. It took me forever to find out that. It took me for a long time. I was in probably my junior or senior year of high school in the early 2000s before I found out that Sailor Moon actually had this season. And so I had missed out on a whole season of Sailor Moon. And this, and Stars, actually brings it to a conclusion, as it was the final season of Sailor Moon. Whereas Super S just left us hanging on a note, on a side note. But and not only was that final season dropped, a lot of Sailor Moon episodes were either edited to where they were put together so that they could make the link, which changed the episodes in themselves, such as during the first season, leading up to the final battle with the big boss for that season. There were episodes that were cut out completely, and then there was a bunch of them that were compressed together leading up to the actual battle. So it basically undercut everything that was important about it. And a lot of S and Super S were dropped too, which is why there's so few episodes of them to it. And R was even cut a good amount. Okay, give me a moment. Sorry. Okay, and back to Cardcaptor Sakura, or Cardcaptors. Of the 70 episodes that aired in the U.S., the 70 episodes that there was to the entire series, only 38, which means just a little, just barely over half of them were aired. And they were either aired out of order, or they were changed in some way that changed the episode as well. Or if they did manage to keep the episode in mind for the way it was, it still got changed because a lot of the focus, rather than on the main protagonist of the series, Sakura, was actually focused on the other character in it, Lee Xiaoran. And I believe that's another, and it's not an I believe, it's from what I found. When I watched the anime growing up, I remember that Lee and Mei Lin, even though they introduced them as fiancé and in the American version as well, the part they changed is that instead of Lee and her being cousins in China, They were just longtime friends. The change in this, I believe, is due to America's ideas and how it. But the thing is, the change affected how you viewed the Chinese and Japanese beliefs, because I think the way they were referring to them as fiance could be seen as a representation of the cultures, and how that wasn't deemed too inappropriate because of how it was done. Um, and now, and as was mentioned in by the channel Get in the Robot, when they talked about how in Latin America the anime was different and better than what America showed with card captors. The episodes they left out lead into the second movie known as The Sealed Card, which then leads into the new series that came out more recently called The Clear Cards. The Clear Cards. Sakura, Cardcaptor Sakura, The Clear Cards. And the opening of that and the prologue thing they did for it, you have to have the last set of episodes, which were cut from the US version, and the second movie known as The Sealed Card, in order for that opening scene to make sense in it about this teddy bear that they have. Okay, another issue, and this, a good amount I got from the Get in the Robot episode I just mentioned, is how initially anime and Japanese video games were seen as secondary markets. In other words, overlooked, undervalued, and this was the target audience were the women and children in that market. But I agree with this other idea that while Japan wanted in the American market, America, I'm sorry to say it, but I do believe that America was that egotistical and honestly believed that Japanese anime and video games, which is why we had so few of them and why a lot of ours were not that good, were inferior in quality, which, like I said, look at the cartoons we had during the 90s that were not from the Asian market. And you can see how the characters look different, how the stories are more independent episode focused rather than a story arc actually being there a lot of the time, which I think ruins it. But again, and America, rather than, since they saw them as this inferior quality or secondary market, they instead, again, the inferior quality is my words. The secondary market was used by Get in the Robots channel on their take on anime and why it was different in Latin America and better than it was in the US version. And again, this also comes from theirs on this part. Rather than paying for the licensing and keeping it as it was, they got the licensing from Latin America and other countries that already did it and paid them to just have the changes done to put it in the American market, which I think is a really bad thing to do, personally. But that's what I believe. I can believe they actually did that in order to save money because, well, America has a thing about making money, and when they don't really see a value in trying to find a cheaper way to have things done. And as was mentioned in Getting the Robots episode about the anime doing better in Latin America and being different, the way it was marketed to them was different. Whereas we wanted everything to be all one thing and it all be great. In Latin America, It was marketed like telenovelas. I'm sorry if I said that wrong. Basically, mini soap operas that they could package into seasons and then sell around the world. And as they stated, these things have become more popular over the years compared to America's already existing cartoons and soap operas for that reason, because they can be marketed in a short range. Which is why I also believe the Korean dramas are doing so well, because they follow the same ideas that telenovelas from them. That they do the same thing as the anime and telenovelas. Okay, now I would like to get into the different types and genres of anime that there are. There's, and I'm sorry if I mispronounce these. There's the Kodomo, which in video game ratings would be the E rating for everybody, and in a lot of American television, G or Y. I can remember when they actually used a G rating, but now it's Y, where it's basically like little kids stuff where they teach sharing and getting along and doing teamwork type things. Okay, then comes the shonen and shoujo, which are aimed at older kids, mainly 13 and up. And this would include your Dragon Ball, Bleach, Fairy Tail, and another one of my favorites, the Jikoku Shoujo or Hell Girl series. And it's because of the violence and the language and some innuendo that would not be deemed appropriate for children younger than that. Okay, then we got what's known as the harem or reverse harem. Harem, as most people know, is when, and basically both of these are another way of saying where the main characters of one gender is surrounded by members of another gender in their lives. Love Hina, High School D&D, or DXD, I'm sorry, I'm not sure how to pronounce that correctly. The Oran Host Club, and another one is the Wallflower. The Wallflower I have not seen, but the other three I have. Love Hina and High School D&D are mainly focused on the regular harem, where it's a guy with a bunch of girls around him. And the reverse harem would be the example of Oran High School Host Club and the Wallflower, where it's the girl surrounded by a bunch of guys. And the thing is, again, this one falls like the shonen and shoujo animes, where it's PG-13 or higher, where it would be like 13 or older, because there are some more innuendo, and this one tends to have more focus with the sexual humor, whether it's implied or flat out said, but it's nothing really actually bad shown. Another genre is the horror genre, where it's made to be the scary, spooky, much like American horror films. Dead Man Wonderland, where in this one's interesting because in Dead Man Wonderland, it kind of falls in a mix to me as a supernatural and a horror version, because it starts out with a kid who's going on a field trip, he's bored, and he ends up in prison type situation because he's accused of murdering everybody in his class when he's blacked out, and then wakes up and finds them all dead. And now the only way to earn his freedom is by fighting all these people in this prison and being the sole survivor. And another example of horror is the Blood Plus, Blood Minus C, what I refer to as the Blood franchise. which features Saya, the vampire slayer, who's also half vampire, kind of like male Blade, kind of like the female Blade, so to speak, but younger looking. And again, this one has a lot of language issues and blood and supernatural. So again, wouldn't be for children necessarily. Then there comes the romance era and the romance type. And a lot of your romance ones, I don't know if it's intentional or not, but a lot of them that I've seen end up being comedies in the process, rather than just being solely focused on the romantic notion of it. Like the two I'm going to mention, Toradora and Onigai Teacher, which in the U.S. was known as Please Teacher. And Onigai Teacher actually shows a student-teacher relationship in it as well. And in the American version, actually allowed for this, amazingly. So it shows you how much times it changed since the days of Cardcaptor Sakura in America. But again, Toradora, Onigai Teacher were two examples of the romance. And like I said, romance tends to have a lot of habits of turning into the comedies, which leads me into my next category of comedy. My next category, the comedy section. Fruits Basket, which, as many know if they've got Crunchyroll, has recently started a new version of it, where right now it's going through what the original one did, but hopefully it gets a second season and it can build off where the first one left off and actually focus on the manga up to the end of the manga. And another example of comedy, the Full Metal Alchemist and Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood. I know these are more action and considered supernatural because they deal with alchemy, but majority of the time I could not stop laughing while watching these. And also, if you're a real diehard fan of the Full Metal Alchemist and Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, I would avoid the movie, the live action movie they made, because in my view, they tried to compress too much into it, which made the movie's quality suffer for it. This next one, hope I'm pronouncing it right, the ecchi, is known for sexual humor and innuendo, and it's often compared to an R rating in movies, but I tended to see these more as PG-13s rating, because the ones I could find that were on the list for these weren't as bad as in my view, wouldn't have deserved an R rating. Such as the Seven Deadly Sins. A lot of sexual innuendo and humor to it, but not really anything bad. And it's got a lot of action stuff to it. Now the next one, Heaven's Lost Property. This one would push PG-13 to R, but not really breaking R, because it still fits more into the PG-13 with language. And it does sexual humor and innuendo, but nothing actual sexual to it. And Student Council's Discretion was another example of this. Again, a lot of sexual humor and innuendo, because the main character in it, the guy, is actually trying to aim for what he deems the harem ending, where everybody in the student council will end up happy. But there's nothing actual sexual to it, and it's just funny the way it just makes a lot of teasing humor to it. And again, the language is a problem, but nothing major to it. Okay, and my final genre I wanted to go over is the mechas. Many people know the mechas because they were fans of Gundam and Zoids. Basically, mecha just meant that it was walking vehicles by pilots. And my favorite example of this is actually Neon Genesis Evangelion. And then there's Eureka 7 and Eureka 7 AO, which I don't really recommend the AO thing because it was more of an attempt to make a continuation but didn't live up to expectations in my view. And perhaps the most famous example of the mecha, and that many people might not realize, is Voltron, Defenders of the Universe. What makes this interesting is that the original Voltron, Defenders of the Universe, is not the actual name for this. In Japanese, I can't pronounce the first name and it's long, but the second part of the name was actually Go Lion, which actually makes sense as the units that the Voltron pilots control are in the forms of lions. And again, this series, I think the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers might have taken some inspiration from, because each of these lions that were piloted could act on their own, same as the Zords that were controlled by the Power Rangers. Or they could all come together and form one Megazord type figure, which American version of Power Rangers referred to as the Megazord. And what they do, they fought an evil monster and defended whatever they were supposed to be protecting. In Voltron, it was the universe and other planets of the galaxy. Whereas in Power Rangers, it was in particular Earth, but also mainly their city from being taken over by Rita. Okay, now I'm going to do my top 20 anime. And first up on the list, Kakaguri, I think is how you pronounce it. The other name for it is Compulsive Gambler, where it's about a school where grades are not as important as how good you are at gambling. And in it, you can either be the best gambler and basically run the school, or you can be one of the worst gamblers and become known as what's known as a pet. The males are known as dogs or puppies, and the girls as kittens, which I think is a very clever way of getting around the sexual reference. But this one's a comedy and a drama, and I would give it a PG-13, though the main character at times may enjoy gambling just a little too much. If you watch it, you'll see what I mean. And I recommend watching it in the Japanese rather than the English, because while the English is still funny and tries to keep it the same, it still changes slightly. And next on the list is X. To be honest, I don't know really why it was called X, but it was. It came in both a TV series and a movie that I'm aware of. And it's a supernatural action, and it has some comedy to it. And it can also show how, and a good part of this, actually a good overall theme of this, is how fate is intertwined and how it can be affected by certain things happening. How that red string of fate ties us together and how dangerous it can be. And I'll give this one a PG-13 also, because of the language in it and the violence. Not really much sexual innuendo to it, though. Number 18, Inuyasha. And I know people have seen this if you've been around since 2000 to watch any anime. Comedy, action, romance, PG-13 is what I'm giving it for a rating. Again, this one's got some sexual innuendo and actions, but nothing really provocative that crosses it into the line known as hentai, where it gets explicitly sexual. And and a good part of this is comedy and action. And I also find it interesting with the brothers in this series of Inuyasha and Shishomaru, their interactions, and how this also could be seen as a look at racial. Of being interracial somewhat because of the main character Inuyasha being half human, half demon, and wasn't accepted by the humans, but wasn't accepted by the demons either because of being a half breed. Number 17, The Full Metal Alchemist and Full Alchemist Brotherhood. Comedy, action, supernatural. I've went over this, what I thought about this series, and I give it a PG-13. And a good part of this story focuses on why alchemy can be good or bad, depending on the person that uses it. And also, it's about two brothers who are trying to correct a mistake they made. And how this can also show you how countries that focus on themselves can be so dangerous due to what they do. And where they're willing to declare war over something they want. Number 16, Trigun, also known as The Adventures of Vash the Also known as The Adventures of Vash the Stampede. This is a very good comedy, action, and adventure. PG-13 overall because, again, it may have some references, but nothing actual explicit to it. But this one's more on the violence and action, more on the action and adventure side, is the reason why I give it a PG-13, and the language comes into play. But again, with Trigun, I say it's a really good one for that reason. And it shows actually how treating people is actually, how you treat people can actually be a factor in your life, and how it can come back to haunt you, or how being different can get you in trouble or help you in some ways. And also talks about how resources are important. Number 15, Eureka 7. As I discussed earlier, it's a mecha type, but it's also a romance, a comedy, and adventure. PG-13 for this one because of language and some vague and the romance part of it, but mainly the language and the violence in it that occurs. And this one is about a kid who joins up with a group who are trying to take down the government because they are corrupt. And they're wanting to protect these people and make things better overall. But the boy actually joins after he meets a girl who's piloting one of the mechas. Number 14, One Piece. Action, adventure, comedy, romance, PG-13. This one's about pirates trying to take over and find this lost treasure so that they can claim it and be declared king of the pirates. What surprises me about this one is that it's run since the late 90s, about, if not longer, than Pokemon actually has. And it's still continuing in its manga form, even. I'm trying to figure out how good this creator actually is and how they can keep coming up with new stories and story arcs for it. Number 13, the Fooly Cooly franchise, also known as FLCL. There's been two recent versions that came out, progressive and alternative. I don't like them as much as I did the original, but they are good. And this is an action, adventure, comedy, and even romance to a small degree that are all thrown in. And what makes this one special is that it's an independent episodes, basically, but they have an overall story arc that they all fit into. And this one I gave a PG-13. This one talks about how intergalactic space ranger officer, something like that, comes to Earth to hunt for this figure known as the Pirate King, and this boy seems to have the power to help her find it, and all these misadventures happen. This is in the original, but overall it's good. And then the alternative and progressive recently happened. But also another thing I find interesting is the ending of the manga has a suggestion to it that has had many fans actually in a back and forth argument over what's actually happening at the end of it, as opposed to the way the anime ended it for the original. Okay, number 12, Pokemon. And this is an action, adventure, comedy, somewhat of a romance, and it gets PG-13 due to language and violence. And one episode of it, I could see where the sexual innuendo and humor is involved as a problem. But what interests me about this series is that the creators that did the anime for it actually agreed with me to some extent when they were interviewed about this. Okay, they did this big poll before where it was, who do you think Ash is meant to be with? And it listed the girls from the different sets of Pokemon. Misty, May, Dawn, Iris, Serena. Sorry, I forget who the most recent is. I think it's Lily's her name. And it even listed some minor girls as well. Some of the minor characters that were female as well. Talking about who do you believe Ash should have ended up with. Well, it turns out that the creators of the anime didn't think it was going to make it past the first season. And in their minds, Ash was actually meant to end up with Misty, which is who I had in mind. When I first saw it, I was like, Ash and Misty, I liked it because the opposites attract type deal. And another interesting fact is, a rumor I've heard going around is that the new series Shield and Sun, or whatever they do after Sun and Moon series, is going to end. Shield and Sword, I think it's called. But anyways, when they do it, supposedly the rumor is that Ash isn't going to be a part of it and that they're going to start with somebody new. Number 11, the Naruto franchise. But for me, I don't like Boruto. I prefer the Naruto and Naruto Shippuden because the action, comedy, romance. And this one, I actually felt like I could relate to one of the characters in it, Shikamaru. Guy who's smart, but also known to be extremely lazy and prefers to play chess rather than doing any type of actual work, if possible. Same as I would prefer chess or video games over doing work. But, life happens. And and there were couples in this one I called when I saw it during the first Chunin exam. My first thought was Shikamaru and Tamari, the way they were going to be a couple just because, again, opposites attract. The couple that surprised me a little bit was actually Naruto and Hinata, because though I liked them, I was going off the way the anime was doing things and the way they were playing it. During the original Naruto, I actually expected Naruto and Sakura to end up together. But Shippuden happened, and I think it actually came to the right conclusion for the way it was done. Again, that's another one. That's another one that was based off of a manga. Like I said, with Boruto, it's not that it's bad, it's just, it feels like I'm watching stuff repeat itself a lot, and to me, that's the sign that the anime shouldn't be happening when that occurs. Though I do like that it did continue and show what happened to a lot of the characters from Naruto and Naruto Shippuden, and explains a lot of things, and even shows how Naruto's children are. Now for number 10, the blood, what I list as the Blood franchise, Blood Plus, Blood C. I mean Blood minus C or Blood dash C. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. But again, the one's about Saya the Vampire Slayer. Supernatural action. This one I could go PG-13 to R, and again, it's the violence, the language, and this one, it's been a while since I've watched them, but I'm pretty sure there was some sexual innuendo made in it, which raised some issues to me, even though it's not that wrong. But also, another thing that makes this one good, and the reason why I enjoyed it a lot, is the live action movie they had for it, of the Blood movie. I really enjoyed the movie itself, because it didn't try to compress a lot into it, and it didn't try to make it into like two separate movies that it wouldn't make sense. It made one movie based around one story arc, at least to me, it seemed like it was only one story arc, and it played out the movie completely. And by the end of the movie, you had your resolution to it, and everything made sense. Number 9, Cardcaptor Sakura, Card Captors. I prefer the subbed version when it comes to the episodes and the movies. And this one I would list as a comedy, coming of age, romance, action, adventure. And it gets a PG-13 due to the language and violence in it. I would go PG, but also since it does show the romance and how much they care for each other, and even though it's not explicit or anything pushing the limits, which is why I stopped at PG-13. Kuro's a little over the top, though, with his language issues. But again, it's a good anime, it has a good story overall. And unlike the American version where it focused only on the male character as they were trying to market to boys, the anime, this one should have actually been left alone, because I actually found Sakura a more interesting character. And when I watched it in the Japanese version with all the episodes, it made a lot more sense and was a better story overall. Okay, number 8, the Dragon Ball franchise. And I do include GT in this, as well as the original and the Super. I'll say this is all Dragon Ball. I consider it to be an action, a comedy, a romance. I give it a PG-13 because, again, this one's got innuendo and sexual humor, but you're not actually seeing anything explicitly from what I can remember of it. And another interesting thing I found out about this, or at least that I can remember as a kid watching it, is that I remember seeing Dragon Ball Z and then it going back and exploring the original Dragon Ball where it's actually about Goku as a kid. Whereas Dragon Ball Z was about Goku as an adult and started focusing on Gohan, his son. And GT was not actually canon. It was completely made up. Just something they threw in because fans enjoyed it, apparently. And I did enjoy the GT series. And I thought the ending to GT actually was a good ending. And then I found out it wasn't canon, and I was like, interesting, well, what is canon, and what happens next? And this is where Dragon Ball Kai and Dragon Ball Super would come in and explain that. Number 7 on the list, Koku Shoujo, the Hell Girl. Supernatural, another one that had some independent episodes, but an overall story arc to it. Some of the episodes I would say roll into an R rating, but overall PG-13 due to the language and the way some things are done in this. And another thing about this is one of the few where the openings to it were actually, in my view, some of the best things about it. The episodes a lot of them were good, and like I said, and the fact that they all fit into the story arc helped. But this one, the openings actually, in the opening credits, actually drew me into it more because I loved the music. First season, the artist Snow, or also known as Yuki, did a song called Sakasama no Cho. I'm probably mispronouncing that completely, but the translated name for it is the inversed butterfly, or inverted butterfly. That's another one where I found it was a 50-50 deal on the title name. And the third season is known as Tsukihana, the moonflower. And it's done by, I want to say, Nana Kitade. I'm probably mispronouncing that as well. I apologize to the artists for this, but I do enjoy both those songs very much, and I had to look really hard to find them. And they are very good, even in the full versions. Number 6, Fairy Tail. This one is a more recent, compared to a lot of the anime I enjoyed. And it's comedy, it's got great story arcs, and a lot of the characters are explored more deeply in this, which is why it helps to make the stories better. Make the series better. This one, as much as I would like to say that it would deserve an R rating, I think it stops at PG-13 because, again, it's mostly innuendo and sexual humor with language issues. The violence in it, you could see in basic. You would have seen in Dragon Ball and things like that as well. In Dragon Ball and Bleach. So, like I said, a lot would probably say it gets an R rating, but I would stop it at PG-13 as being the worst for it. One great thing they did in this was the story of Loki, aka Leo, the lion spirit. The lion spirit of the Zodiac Keys. And his backstory. When it did his story in it, even though it was very limited number of episodes, it actually works. And even how Lucy became a part of the guild, and the story arcs that occurred around them were great too. Like I said, but the one I've enjoyed most, besides the Grand Magic games, has to be Loki's little spot that he got for like 2 or 3 episodes that had to do with him and how it explores his backstory and how he came to be who he was. Number 5, the Student Council's Discretion. And I'm only saying the English name because I really can't pronounce the Japanese name that came with it. And like I said, this one comes from a manga series that was actually made up of multi-volumes that itself had many different names. And this one's got a lot of comedy and some story arc to it, where it's got an overall story arc, but it's mostly independent episodes with a lot of comedy to it. And again, now this one I give PG to PG-13, but the only reason it's getting PG-13 is the sexual humor in it, and maybe language. And this one also mocks like other things, like the first episode, They talk about how they want this to become a special series and liked by the fans. And one of the characters suggests they look for 7 of something, make multiple Dragon Ball franchise references. Searching for 7 of something, searching for these magic objects that search for 7 magic objects that grant a wish. And the first reference is Kai. And it actually shows him doing like Goku's little charging up when he's getting ready to go Super Saiyan, where it gets gold around. And when he actually goes Super Saiyan, it gets gold around him while he stays the same. Kind of like the Kaioken mode, more or less, than Super Saiyan, but it's got the gold color of the Super Saiyan. Then, when it makes the second reference, where it talks about wanting to look for 7 of something that grants a wish to the people who gather it, he makes a reference to the movie Dragon Ball Evolution, and one of the female characters in this waves her hand at him like, no, we do not mention that. Even stating how bad that they thought the movie was. And I have to agree, because when James Marsters, I think that's how you say it, the guy who played Spike on Buffy the Vampire Slayer, couldn't help make your movie any better and save it, tells you how bad the movie actually was. Despite the cast was actually pretty good. James as Piccolo was really good, and they messed that up really badly. If he couldn't even help save your movie and get it to actually break in the money. Number 4 on the list, Neon Genesis Evangelion. Again, mecha. It's a good story arc. PG-13 for this. And if you include the movies, it could be pushed into an R rating. And something many fans, this one talks about, and the anime overall, the story of Neon Genesis Evangelion is about what they declare as the second impact, and they're worried about a third impact for mankind versus these beings that are attacking them known as angels. And their only defense, to use these mechas they know as Avas, and to attack and defend their city. And the main character in this story is actually interesting because it's a shy character that has self-esteem issues. What a lot of people may not know about this anime, in the manga, I'm not sure if it applies to the anime specifically or if it was actually just the series in general. I think it's actually the series in general. When Neon Genesis Evangelion was created to be a manga, the person who created it actually created it as a way of dealing with their diagnosis of finding out they were diagnosed with depression, and how they came to eventually accept it, which I think the show actually reflects really well. The problem is that when this show aired in the 90s, a lot of the fans, especially American fans, didn't like the way the series ended and were wanting a movie or wanting an actual real, what they declared as a real ending to the series. So, being generous, they decided to make the movies. The company made the movies. The refrain of Evangelion, which basically summarized everything up to, all the way through the series of Evangelion. And then the movie The End of Evangelion, which is the ending they came up with for the movie. And in my view, they should have left it at the series because the movie falls extremely short and seemed like a big waste of time. Number 3 on the list, Sayuki franchise. Well, Sayuki is the name of the anime. And the thing is, in recent years, there was another set made for the show, Sayuki Reload Blast, which I do not actually include because this one was more like a reset of the Sayuki series that I enjoyed, where it's about four people chosen by this goddess to travel to the West and stop somebody who's actually corrupting faith and science and mixing them together, which, due to them doing this, is creating an imbalance and causing the demons in the world, well, at least a lot of them, to turn back into their demon forms and become these evil creatures. Whereas beforehand, they could have like this special form of jewelry, or just naturally, they weren't always evil. They could be good people, live normal lives. As a matter of fact, one of the characters in this that's part of the main travel group is a half-breed who's demon and human, and was actually a good person. I mean, his main problem was he was a lot like the character of Gambit in X-Men. He liked to gamble and drink a lot and be with different women. Now, then you got the character who was married. A band of demons took his wife and did very bad things to her. You watch the anime again, you'll find out. And he killed every one of them. Well, it turns out there's a rule. You kill so many demons, and you yourself will be punished as you will become one. But he was also punished by the gods because he had went off and killed these demons out of anger, out of anger and vengeance, rather than for it actually being for a good reason in their view. And then you got the actual demon, well, one that's considered to be a demon but isn't, Son Goku, the monkey born from the stone. And he spent 500 years locked up in a cave somewhere, and nobody ever came across him, which I found interesting. And then you got your priest, who's the leader of this little group, who's known as Genjo Sanzo, which is a high order priest, apparently. And his deal is that he's in charge of Goku, as he was the one who actually freed him after 500 years of imprisonment. And when he did, he got placed, like I said, in charge of him. And now he's been put in charge by the goddess, by the mother goddess, the eternal goddess, some name like that, but the something goddess, who wanted him to go check this out and told him who she wanted to be in his group. And their job is to make it to the West and actually stop this from happening. I mean, to stop this stuff from happening and return things to the way they were, or as close to it as it can get anyways. This one's a good adventure comedy and got great story arcs. Again, sexual innuendo, sexual humor to it, and language and violence. So PG-13. This one might push into the R rating, but not really. And a fact that people don't realize is that Sayuki and Dragon Ball were both loosely based on a Chinese novel known as Journey to the West. Number 2 on the list, Pretty Guardian Sailor Moon. Again, the Japanese version with English subtitles. Comedy, action, romance, coming of age. This one I give PG-13, though due to the transformation scenes, if you actually get it in the Japanese version with the subtitles, it could be pushed to an R rating for that. Because even though there's stuff that's hidden, not actually hidden all that well. And this one is about about 14, 14 when she starts, 16 when the series with stars included, ended. It's about a girl who becomes this hero in what's known as the magical girl transformation type deals. Again, it's a comedy, action, romance, magical girl, coming of age, all that. And it shows her growing up. And it shows her friends who also had, some of them become fellow guardians with her. Some of them are just people she knows. And then others are just strangers but her job is basically to be this hero. And one thing that one thing I can say that that the English dubbed version did that I enjoyed was the songs they had. 3 particular songs that they had in it. Rainy Day Man, when Sailor Jupiter meets up with an old friend and she's helping him out when he's in the hospital, and she's trying to help keep him healthy, and talks about their past together. It shows this. Because it shows her actually, in the American version, they say that she's actually confessing her love to this man, and the guy turns her down, and her best friend comes up and holds an umbrella over her so she wouldn't get wet in the storm that's happening at the time. And this is her best friend, which is while this song's playing. Carry on from the battle during the original Sailor Moon story arc with the boss of that season. And then from Sailor Moon R, the final episode, the big boss battle in that one, also, I like the song they played for that, known as The Power of Love. GetInTheRobot, I'm not sure if they actually meant it or not, but I think they mentioned something about actually liking the song Power of Love as well. Number 1 on my list, before I get to number 1 on my list, there is one anime I would like to have added, but the reason why I didn't is because it was only 3 episodes, and technically they were listed as OVAs. And it never got made into a full series because apparently parents were up in arms so badly about it that, over some of the subject matter discussed in it, that it didn't make it. But in a manga form, it went for a pretty good while. It actually had a real story to it. Angel Sanctuary is what it was called. It talks about 2 angels who were punished, and that their punishment was that they would be reincarnated only to make their sins worse and worse over time, and only to be born over and over and into a tragedy at some point, and that eventually they would commit like an ultimate sin type deal, where they would be banished to hell after they died for the final time. Well, in the current incarnation, they're born as a brother and sister. And like I said, this one, the subject matter got them in trouble, is why there's only 3 OVAs to it. And I think that's a mistake, because I think if it actually explored the whole story, it would have been better off, and parents wouldn't have been as judgmental about the idea of it as they were. And I'm actually confused why the Japanese company that produced it originally didn't actually continue with it, if the people over there had the same issues, or if it was something else that caused it. But like I said, with this one, if they'd actually continued it from the manga, if they'd actually continued it and kept up with the manga, it would have made a good story overall. And now, number one on my list of anime, the Dirty Pair franchise. From the 80s, Dirty Pair, the original Dirty Pair, and then from the 90s, or early 2000s, I'm not sure exactly when this got made, the Dirty Pair Flash. This one, I would give R rating because, well, this one, like Sailor Moon, PG-13 to R due to the transformation not being edited, and the language, violence, and sexual innuendos and humor that's made in it. And it fits into the comedy action. During the second section, in the second story arc of it, you get some romance in it, but through each of them you have some type of romantic type deal going on, but it's not really anything special that truly makes it a romance type story, but it's mainly action, comedy. And this one shows girls as the heroes, no real men involved in helping out, except during the second season. The second season or second story arc of it. But again, in the original Dirty Pair, you just had the two girls as your main thing, and you had like the man as their boss, but he played no real part in it. And they also had this really big cat they called Moogie. In Dirty Pair Flash, the cat Moogie was actually a small cat that a stray they'd picked up. They had a boss that was male, but they had two different bosses that were male, but neither one played a big part. And they had a guy during the second season that was basically like a guest star on a regular TV show. On a regular type TV series would have been. He'd been a guest star because he'd only been there for that one season, or that one story arc. So he didn't really serve much of a purpose either. And an interesting fact about this one is that when they did the Dirty Pair, when they did the original Dirty Pair, yeah, they were good. But when Dirty Pair Flash came up, one of the actresses said they wouldn't do it if they could, and that they would only do it if they could get the other actress that was in it, because the two were such good friends, the two got along so well, that if they couldn't get the other actress to come join them, then the one who was in would leave. She wouldn't do it either. Well, they couldn't do it, so that actress decided against doing it. So they decided, instead of making a continuation, this would instead become an alternate timeline or an alternate story type deal. And even had, but what's interesting is that during the story arc, they did get the first actress to return and even used her character somewhat, but they changed her so that they could keep the current ones, Kai and Yuri, as the focus, and had this one actually become like a past member who had gone rogue eventually. But again, her backstory is explained in this alternate world in the episode. In one of the episodes, so there's no reason for me to go on about that. But with this one, like I said, it's an alternative version of it. And I found this one to be just as humorous, though it did a lot more on the action side than the original did. And this one also had a few more independent episodes. This one was, while it had this one, the original, both had an overall story arc, but the original had more of an actual build-up story type deal, whereas this one, because of the way it was done, had like 5 or 6 episodes for the first story arc, so they had to compress a lot to make it. So many for the second, and then the last one was like 4 episodes, I think it was total, and they were almost completely random. I mean, they actually were completely random episodes, but the focus was on the two as a team. Now, please leave in your comments. Please leave your comment of your favorite anime as a child or even now, and even what you would like me to discuss in an upcoming video. I am actually reading the comments when they show up, so like I said, it would be nice to know. Have fun and see you next time.